1986, a wall of sound that absolutely defined a generation of heavy metal. Okay, let's dive right into this. We are talking about a record that didn't just push the boundaries of thrash, it completely rewrote the sonic rulebook from the ground up. Welcome to this explainer of the legendary Master of Puppets tone. As your resident gear historian here at the Tone Manual, I am so pumped to decode this absolute masterpiece for you today. The big central question we are answering right off the bat is this: how exactly did James Hetfield create that aggressive, legendary bite without the whole thing turning into just a fuzzy mess? Because, think about it. If you've ever plugged into a high-gain amp, cranked the distortion all the way up to 10, and just hammered a heavy E chord, you know exactly what usually happens, right? The sound just collapses. It turns into absolute sonic mud. It gets fuzzy, undefined, and chaotic. Your low end totally flubs out, the highs are piercing, and any kind of complex fast picking, yeah, that gets totally lost in the wash. But on this record, man, the rhythm guitars are clinically tight. They hit like an absolute sledgehammer, yet every single fast pick note is razor sharp. You hear every pick strike, every subtle palm mute, and every aggressive slide. And to get that level of clarity, it's actually not just about the amp itself, it's about the architecture.
See, back in 1985, most bands were just plugging straight into a standard Marshall stack, or maybe they'd rely on the kind of thin, artificial sound of a distortion pedal. But Metallica, they didn't just plug in and play. No, they built a total Frankenstein rig. Thanks to an advance from their new label, they got their hands on the legendary Mesa Boogie Mark IC Plus amplifiers. But here is the absolute genius part of this whole thing. They essentially split the amplifier system into two distinct brains. They used the Mesa Boogie strictly as a preamp. That gave them that aggressive, modern, high-gain tone shape. And then they completely bypassed the Boogie's internal power section, slaving that finely sculpted signal directly into a modified 100-watt Marshall JCM 800 power amp. So you've got the Mesa providing the surgical, high-gain distortion, and the Marshall bringing that massive, natural, filling-rattling muscle and push of air.
Now, to tame that massive Frankenstein setup we just talked about, you really have to sculpt the frequencies. And that brings us to the holy grail of thrash: scooped mids. In the metal world, scooping the mids literally means aggressively gutting the mid-range frequencies. We're talking right around that 750 hertz mark. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would you do that when the guitar is naturally a mid-range instrument? Well, it's actually pretty simple. When you carve out those honky, nasal, kind of boxy mid-frequencies, what's left? You leave behind only the earth-shaking, percussive lows and those razor-sharp cutting highs. It completely cleans up the mud. It heavily emphasizes that percussive chug. Honestly, this aggressive frequency reduction is the absolute cornerstone of that entire 1986 thrash sound. So what exactly did this scoop look like in the studio? Well, thanks to producer Flemming Rasmussen's original session notes, we have the exact forensic blueprint of those amp settings. And get this, they ran the bass dial shockingly low, just at a 2. The mids were at 4 and the treble way up at 7. They also engaged the amp's hidden pull knobs, which gives you those extra deep lows and a shifted treble response. But the real magic? That happened on the Mesa's legendary built-in 5-band graphic EQ. They set that thing in a drastic, extreme V shape. And actually, to push it even further, Rasmussen inserted a B&B effects parametric equalizer right into the effects loop to surgically sculpt and tighten the tone even more. It was this highly specific, crazy architecture that took a fuzzy mess and tamed it into a razor-sharp weapon.
But here's the thing. You can have the best amp architecture in the world, and it literally won't matter at all if your tone isn't starting out right at the strings. This era saw the rise of what I call the active edge, specifically the massive transition toward EMG 81 active pickups. You see, unlike traditional passive pickups that can sometimes sound a bit dry or peaky or even lose high-end frequencies over long cable runs, active pickups have a built-in internal preamp right inside the guitar itself. This hum-canceling, low-impedance design gave them the exact forensic clarity and broad bandwidth they needed. It allowed them to articulate those incredibly fast, aggressive thrash riffs without losing a single ounce of definition, even when they were buried under absolute mountains of gain. It's actually really cool to look back at the source material for this. If you pull up the original EMG catalog, they describe the 81 model perfectly. They wrote, the ceramic magnet in combination with wide aperture steel poles lend a quick attack, but the tone stays nice and fat at the same time. That right there is the holy grail for a metal player. Think about it. When you are downpicking at a blistering 220 beats per minute, you absolutely need to pick up that response instantly. You need that quick attack. but you can't afford for it to thin out and lose that tight low end. That internal preamp essentially acts as a secret weapon. It maintains absolute punchiness and definition through the heaviest overdrive imaginable, perfectly capturing every single relentless pick strike. Of course, those active pickups need a host, right? And the 1986 arsenal was basically built for war. The main rhythm tracks for this album were largely laid down using a couple of absolutely iconic, heavily constructed guitars. Primarily, Hetfield was wielding a white Jackson Custom Shop King V, which was famously nicknamed the Kill Bon Jovi guitar, and he ran that alongside his trusty backup Gibson Explorer. The dense, incredibly resonant mahogany wood of these heavy body shapes provided a massive, warm acoustic foundation. So picture this. You've got that thick, weighty wood resonance hitting those high-output active pickups, which then slams right into that scooped, high-gain Mesa Boogie preamp. It was just a recipe for total sonic perfection. But wait, because the sound you hear roaring out of your speakers on the record, that is definitely not just one guitar. It is a meticulously crafted wall of sound. Producer Flemming Rasmussen employed this massive 6 to 8 track layering process. Here's how they did it. Step 1, they'd record the main full riffs panned hard left and right. Simple enough. But step 2, that is the absolute secret sauce of this album. They called it the thickener. Hetfield would go back in and track a completely separate pass playing only the low 5th and 6th strings, just the thick chugs, and they'd pan those tracks slightly inward somewhere around the 11 and 1 o'clock positions. Then step 3, they'd add even more full riff doubles panned at different angles. By perfectly stacking all these frequencies and using that thickener trick, they essentially created the sonic illusion of one colossal, unbeatable instrument.
So how do you even capture a layered monster like that in a physical studio room? Well, you do it with a really brilliant 3-mic architecture on the speaker cabinets. Rasmussen was using up to 6 microphones per guitar pass. It's crazy. On each cab, he'd place a standard Shure SM57 right up against the speaker cone to capture that direct, aggressive attack. Then he used a super pristine B and K microphone to grab the natural resonance of the room itself. And finally, an AKG gold tube mic was angled at 45 degrees, sitting about 3 or 4 feet back. The really smart part here is that by physically mixing these mics at different distances, he could purposely phase cancel specific muddy frequencies right there in the room, instead of just relying entirely on a mixing board EQ later on. It created this unparalleled sense of sonic depth. Yet, after all of that, after the Frankenstein amps, the active pickups, the surgical EQs, and these wild 6-mic studio setups, we arrive at the absolute most crucial component of the entire operation, the human variable. This tone relies entirely on relentless, aggressive downpicking. And I don't just mean playing the strings in a downward motion. I mean striking them with such consistent, forceful velocity that the playing style itself literally acts as a physical compressor. When you strike those heavy strings downward with that much sheer power over and over, you are pushing the front end of the amplifier right up to its breaking point. That's what creates that legendary, filling, rattling thump that no overdrive pedal on earth could ever replicate. The actual attack of the pick is literally forging the distortion.
And to prove just how vital this human element really is, listen to what producer Flemming Rasmussen himself had to say about it. He said, "James is the rhythm master. He's tight as... well, you know, I rate James as the best rhythm guitar player on the planet." And he's not exaggerating. In fact, during these studio sessions, lead guitarist Kirk Hammett didn't track a single rhythm part on the album. Not one. James recorded every single left and right rhythm track, up to 8 massive layers, with absolute machine-like precision. If his timing was even a millisecond off across all those complex layers, that massive wall of sound would have instantly turned into a phasey, messy blur. The ultimate key to this iconic tone was the sheer discipline of the player's right hand. So what does this all mean for us today? Well, the 1986 tone isn't just a cool sound from the past. It is a meticulously engineered blueprint for every metalhead that followed. It is the absolute perfect marriage of that Frankenstein Mesa Marshall architecture, the scooped active EQ clarity, the studio layering wizardry, and of course, the relentless physical compression of the human hand. Now that we've decoded the source material in this explainer, the challenge is officially yours. The 1986 tone is a blueprint for every metalhead. Master the recipe, find your bite, and subscribe to the Tone Manual for more legendary gear breakdowns. Keep riffing.